the stars we once admired, with their tall, majestic images on the silver screen, actually have heights so modest that they're shockingly short. How did they deceive us? How did the magical techniques of cinema turn them into giants? Hollywood's golden age, from the 1920s to the 1960s, was a place where images were carefully constructed. Do you remember? The screen heroes had to exude strength, dominance, but behind that glamour was a sophisticated system of deception, lift boxes, low-angle shots, deep trenches, and even selecting shorter co-stars to hide the truth. Today, we will explore the 12 Hollywood stars with the most modest heights. Let's begin. Number 1, Sal Mineo, the small, rebellious boy. Sal Mineo, with his emotionally charged performances and the vulnerability of youth, became one of the most outstanding supporting actors of the 1950s, especially his Oscar-nominated role alongside James Dean in Rebel Without a Cause. But did you know? The man who created those memorable characters was only 5 feet 6 inches tall, a height that required careful management on screen, especially as he grew up and moved beyond teenage roles. The interesting thing about Mineo is that his height was initially an advantage. In breakthrough roles like the rebellious boy, his small stature perfectly conveyed the fragility and immaturity of a teenager. Director Nicholas Ray cleverly used the height difference between Mineo and James Dean in Rebel Without a Cause to emphasize the character's youthfulness and need for protection. But when Mineo grew up and sought more mature roles, height became a major challenge. The studios used traditional techniques, padded shoes, low-angle shots, and positioning arrangements to avoid direct comparisons with taller actors. Costume designers created outfits that emphasized a slender but balanced figure, with vertical elements to create a lengthening effect. His characteristic pompadour hairstyle, which became an icon, also added a few virtual inches. Unlike some stars who always tried to hide, Mineo sometimes let height serve the character, especially in roles needing vulnerability. Mineo represents the injustice of Hollywood. Limited height perhaps contributed to difficulties in typecasting later roles, leading to career struggles in middle age. Director Don Siegel, who worked with Mineo in Crime in the Streets, once said, "Sal has talent in a body smaller than most actors twice the size. It's a shame when Hollywood sometimes doesn't look beyond appearance to see the wonderful gift he possesses." A deeper analysis. This is a reminder of the arbitrary physical standards of the industry, where many potential talents are rejected just because they don't fit the traditional leading man model. I feel moved when thinking about Mineo, a small guy but big heart, who left a deep mark in our audience's hearts. Number 2, James Cagney, compact explosive power. James Cagney, with his explosive presence and gangster image, dominated Hollywood through decades, from The Public Enemy to White Heat, but audiences didn't realize that the actor who appeared so majestic was actually only 5 feet 5 inches tall. Unlike some actors sensitive about height, Cagney approached the issue pragmatically. "I don't care if I'm tall or short," he once said. "I care if I can act." This attitude extended to his willingness to collaborate with techniques developed by Warner Brothers to enhance his stature. The most common method was strategic casting. Cagney was often surrounded by actors of similar or shorter height in supporting roles. When taller actors were needed, directors used positioning techniques to minimize direct comparisons, like having Cagney sit while others stood, or placing him on stairs in confrontation scenes. Cinematographers developed the Cagney angle, a slightly low camera position to increase height without being obvious. Director Michael Curtis was particularly skilled with these subtle adjustments. What distinguished Cagney was his dynamic performance style that distracted from the height issue. His dancing energy, quick movements, and emotional explosions created a dominant presence that made audiences rarely notice his stature. As film historian David Thompson observed, Cagney moved like a coiled spring. The energy made him larger than life regardless of actual height. Warner Brothers promotional materials always inflated his height to 5 feet 9 inches, 4 inches taller than reality. From my perspective, Cagney is proof of the power of personality. In an era when men had to be tall, he turned limitations into advantages, creating the classic gangster style. I feel admiration and a bit of mystery. How could someone so small dominate the screen like that? That's the magic of talent, folks. Number 3, Sammy Davis Jr., talent larger than life. Sammy Davis Jr., with his extraordinary talent as a singer, dancer, actor, and comedian, became one of the most versatile entertainers in the industry. His dynamic stage presence and endless energy created a dominant aura that shocked many fans when they learned he was only 5 feet 3 inches tall, one of the shortest male stars in Hollywood history. What's fascinating about Davis is that his limited height perhaps contributed to his legendary work ethic and determination to excel in multiple fields. As a black performer facing both racism and height issues, Davis developed diversity and technical perfection to overcome both barriers, unlike dramatic actors needing complex techniques to appear taller. Davis's musical performance style naturally distracted from height. His dynamic choreography, vivid expressions, and powerful voice created a dominant presence that made audiences focus on the performance rather than body size. However, Davis used height-enhancing techniques, especially for film roles needing a traditional leading image. He always wore special padded shoes that added 2 to 3 inches both on and off screen. His high pompadour hairstyle added virtual height. For films and TV, directors used low-angle shots and positioning to minimize differences with taller co-stars. Davis was often placed on higher platforms or terrain when sharing scenes. Rat Pack performances with taller stars like Dean Martin and Frank Sinatra could create awkward contrasts, but the group cleverly incorporated choreography and staging to minimize direct comparisons. Davis was often in motion while others stood still, creating visual energy that distracted from physical differences. Unlike some stars sensitive about height, Davis sometimes incorporated self-deprecating humor into his performances, showing comfort that endeared him to audiences. In one Rat Pack show, when Dean Martin joked about height, Davis replied, "I may look up to you physically, but in music, you're looking up to me." This confident, playful attitude reflected a broader philosophy about the challenges he faced. As he once said in an interview, "Being a short black man, one-eyed in showbiz, means I have to be 10 times better than everyone just to get half the recognition. So I became 10 times better." This determination helped Davis overcome physical limitations to become one of the most beloved figures in entertainment. From a personal perspective, Davis moves me deeply. He not only fought height, but also social prejudices, and won with pure talent. That's an inspiring story, with a bit of mystery about inner strength. Can you imagine a small person becoming a giant on stage? Truly sensational. Number 4, Mickey Rooney, Hollywood's biggest little star. At only 5 feet 2 inches, Mickey Rooney holds the record as one of the shortest male stars in Hollywood history. Yet, this little actor became MGM's biggest box office star in the late 1930s and early 1940s, leading the Andy Hardy series and starring in musicals with Judy Garland. Unlike other short actors who desperately hit it, Rooney's case was unique because MGM initially marketed him as a teen star, where his small height fit perfectly for playing teenagers well into his 20s. The Andy Hardy films, with Rooney as the typical American boy navigating adolescence, turned height into an advantage rather than a disadvantage in the early career phase. The challenge came when Rooney matured and sought adult roles. MGM used technical solutions, 3-inch padded shoes, special angles. Directors placed him on hidden platforms or had taller actors sit when sharing scenes. Cinematographer Harold Rawson developed lighting techniques that elongated Rooney's shadow on walls. creating a subconscious impression of greater height. Costume designers avoided horizontal patterns that emphasized shortness, instead using vertical elements to elongate. What's interesting about Rooney is that height was eventually integrated into his later career. As his initial stardom phase declined, Rooney took roles where height differences were used for humor, especially when paired with much taller female actors. This self-aware approach demonstrated remarkable adaptability, helping extend his career over 80 years. Throughout his long career, Rooney maintained a philosophical attitude about height. "I'm not a tall man," he once told a reporter, "but I stand among giants in this industry." This perspective focused on his immense talent, rather than physical limitations, helping him navigate an industry that often prioritized traditional leading height. As director Clarence Brown, who worked with Rooney in National Velvet and other films, observed, "Mickey has more talent in his 5 feet 2 inches frame than most actors twice his size. The camera doesn't measure inches, it measures presence." This presence allowed Rooney to overcome limitations that could have ended careers to become one of Hollywood's most enduring stars. My analysis: Rooney is a symbol of resilience, from a little boy to a legend. He teaches us that height is just an illusion. Talent is eternal. I feel warm when remembering his films, and a bit of mystery about how MGM turned small into big. Number 5. Humphrey Bogart, the not-so-tall dark guy. Humphrey Bogart, with his tough, world-weary persona, made him one of cinema's most iconic leads. The star of Casablanca and the Maltese Falcon wasn't nearly as physically majestic as on screen, while Warner Brothers promotional materials listed him at 5 feet 10 inches. His actual height was closer to 5 feet 8 inches, and some sources suggest it could be as low as 5 feet 6 inches. What's interesting about Bogart is how height deception evolved with his career. When mainly playing supporting and villain roles in the 1930s, the studio made little effort to hide his stature. However, when he broke through as a lead with High Sierra and the Maltese Falcon, Warner Brothers implemented comprehensive height-enhancing techniques. The most famous was the bogey box, portable platforms Bogart stood on when sharing scenes with taller co-stars. This was particularly evident in Casablanca when filming with Ingrid Bergman, who was 5 feet 9 inches tall. Director Michael Curtis carefully arranged scenes to hide the difference, with Bogart often on steps or Bergman seated when appearing together. Cinematographer Arthur Edison developed special lighting and angles for Bogart to create illusions of greater height and presence, including low angles and elongated shadows. Costume designer Ori Kelly created suits with subtle vertical elements and high waists to elongate the frame. Bogart seemed unconcerned about height, focusing on developing his signature persona that made him a legend. His characteristic slouched posture and tilted head, often mistaken as just part of the tough guy image, actually helped mask height differences when standing next to taller actors. Notable about Bogart is that his limited height perhaps contributed to his iconic performance style. His minimalist approach with movement, remaining relatively still and letting his face and voice do the emotional work, helped maintain the carefully crafted height illusion. Warner Brothers' publicity department went to extraordinary lengths to manage public perception of Bogart's height. Official studio photos were carefully composed to make him appear taller, and publicity appearances were tightly managed to control situations where actual height might be revealed. As director John Huston, who worked with Bogart on several of his most important films, observed, Bogey's physical stature had nothing to do with his screen presence. When he walked into a room on screen, you felt it before you saw it. That kind of presence isn't measured in inches. From a personal perspective, Bogart is the biggest mystery. How did someone not tall become a symbol of masculinity? It's the emotional pull that moves me every time I watch Casablanca. A bit sensational. He fooled us perfectly. Number 6. Dustin Hoffman, From Graduate to New Height Illusions. Although Dustin Hoffman emerged a bit later than the classic golden age, including him provides an appealing bridge between old Hollywood techniques and more modern approaches to height illusions. At 5 feet 6 inches, Hoffman faced similar challenges as previous short actors, but approached them with a new era sensibility that often integrated height into character traits rather than completely hiding it. His breakthrough role in The Graduate in 1967 established many techniques used throughout his career. Director Mike Nichols used traditional methods like platforms and angles to enhance Hoffman's height, but also creatively used the height difference with Anne Bancroft as part of the character's psychological dynamic, a young, small boy intimidated by an older, taller woman. What's interesting about Hoffman is that height often became an implicit part of his character's underdog status. In Midnight Cowboy and Kramer vs. Kramer, his smaller stature subtly reinforced the character's position as a man fighting against a larger system or stronger opponents. Instead of viewing height as a limitation to be completely hidden, Hoffman and directors often integrated it as a character element. The technical aspects of managing Hoffman's height evolved from earlier times. While traditional methods like platform shoes, adding 2 to 3 inches, continued to be used, cinematographers developed more sophisticated camera techniques that were less obvious than the low angles used for previous stars. Costume designers worked closely with Hoffman to create wardrobes that enhanced proportions, using vertical elements and avoiding patterns that emphasized shortness. For Tootsie, where Hoffman played a male actor disguised as a female actress, height actually became an advantage, making the female character more convincing. Unlike earlier times when publicity departments actively promoted inflated heights, Hoffman's promotional materials often avoided specific height claims, a modern approach to managing the issue by not drawing attention to it. Hoffman occasionally addressed height with his characteristic frankness. "I think I'm lucky to be short," he once told a reporter. "It forced me to develop other qualities and be specific about the types of roles I pursue. I was never the traditional lead, so I had to find my own path." This self-awareness represents a significant evolution from the Golden Age approach, acknowledging reality while focusing on more important aspects of performance and character. As director Sidney Pollack, who worked with Hoffman in Tootsie, observed, "Dustin doesn't try to be something he's not physically. He makes you forget height by being compelling in every other way." Personal analysis: Hoffman is a bridge between eras, making me reflect on Hollywood's changes. With a bit of mystery about how height became strength, he adds emotion to this list, a small person but giant roles. Number 7. Danny Kaye, The Height of Humor. Danny Kaye, with his extraordinary physical comedy, musical talent, and lightning-fast delivery, made him one of Hollywood's most beloved entertainers in the 1940s and 1950s. His energetic performances in The Secret Life of Walter Mitty and The Court Jester created a dominant presence that few audiences realized he was only 5 feet 7 inches tall, shorter than many female leads and male co-stars. Unlike dramatic actors needing complex techniques to appear more majestic, Kaye's height deception benefited from his comedic persona, his kinetic performances. Constantly moving, gesturing, dancing, twisting, gave audiences little time to register height comparisons with other actors. This perpetual motion became his signature style and an effective distraction from his modest stature. However, Samuel Goldwyn Studios used traditional height-enhancing techniques for Kaye's romantic scenes and moments needing a more traditional leading presence. This included raised platforms for standing conversations with taller female actors and special angles to minimize height differences. Kaye's case is interesting because his physical proportions were actually ideal for dancing and movement. His compact frame and perfect coordination allowed him to perform complex physical comedy and dance routines with precision that taller, less agile actors couldn't match. What could be a limitation in dramatic roles became an advantage in comedic and musical performances. Costume designer Edith Head, who worked with Kaye on several films, developed a specific approach to wardrobes that enhanced proportions. His iconic costumes often featured vertical elements to create a lengthening effect, and Head carefully maintained perfect tailoring that showcased his slender figure to advantage. Unlike some short actors who seem sensitive about height, Kaye approached the issue with the same humor as everything else. During the filming of White Christmas, where he appeared alongside the 6 feet 3 inches tall Bing Crosby, Kaye reportedly joked to the crew, "Between the two of us, we average the perfect height. Bing has the excess and I have the deficit." This playful approach extended to his willingness to occasionally use height differences for comedic effect, especially in scenes with much taller actors, where the contrast became part of the humor. This selective integration of actual stature into performances represented a more sophisticated approach to the height issue than simple concealment. As director Norman Z. MacLeod, who directed Kaye in The Secret Life of Walter Mitty, observed, "Danny's energy makes you forget physical size. When he performs, he expands beyond his actual dimensions. He's as big as his talent, which is gigantic." From my perspective, Kaye brings joy and mystery. How does humor turn small into big? That's a warm emotion, with a bit of sensation about height jokes. Number 8, George Raft, the Little Gangster. George Raft, with his cool, menacing presence, made him one of Hollywood's most defining gangster actors in the 1930s and 1940s. His sleek appearance and minimalist performance style in Scarface and Each Dawn I Die created an intense aura of danger that effectively concealed his surprisingly modest height of only 5 feet 7 inches. What's interesting about Raft is that his professional dancer background influenced both his on-screen movement style and height management techniques. Raft's characteristic stillness, standing immobile with subtle expression changes to convey emotions, was not just an acting choice but a practical technique to maintain carefully arranged height illusions without disrupting them through excess movement. Warner Brothers used a variety of traditional methods to enhance Raft's stature on screen. Special angles, often from slightly below eye level, created a more majestic silhouette. Costume designers created suits with subtle vertical stripes and high-waisted pants to visually elongate the frame. Custom shoes with internal lifts added about 2 inches of height. Strategic casting was particularly important in Raft's films. He was often paired with female actors of more modest height, and male supporting roles were often cast partly based on stature to avoid unfavorable comparisons. When taller actors were required for specific roles, directors used careful positioning techniques, keeping Raft on raised platforms or higher terrain in sets. Raft's gangster persona actually benefited from aspects of his physical stature. His compact, muscular build conveyed coiled energy and potential violence more effectively than a larger frame might have. As film historian Eddie Muller observed, Raft didn't need to loom over you to intimidate. His stillness and dead eyes made him scarier than bigger men who had to rely on size to threaten. Warner Brothers' promotional materials consistently inflated Raft's height, often listing 5 feet 10 inches or even 6 feet in some publications. The studio's photography department developed special techniques for publicity photos using angles and perspectives to create illusions of greater height, especially in group shots with taller co-stars. Unlike some stars who were particularly sensitive about height, Raft seemed to accept the situation with the same cool pragmatism he brought to his roles. Director Raoul Walsh, who worked with Raft on several films, later recalled, "George knew exactly what he was and wasn't. He didn't waste energy worrying about things he couldn't change. He focused on using what he had to maximum effect. This focus on maximizing real attributes rather than obsessing over limitations, helped Raft create an on-screen persona that transcended physical size. As critic Andrew Sarris later observed, Raft's gangsters didn't need physical stature. They had something more intimidating, absolute confidence, and the certainty that they'd win regardless of the odds. Analysis: Raft is the gangster mystery. Small but scary, a bit sensational that makes me think about real power. Emotions from those classic noir films. Number 9. Alan Ladd, the box office star with lift boxes. Alan Ladd, with his piercing eyes and tight-lipped intensity, made him one of Hollywood's most appealing tough guys in films like This Gun for Hire and Shane. Yet, the actor who projected such a fearsome presence was at most 5 feet 6 inches tall, with some accounts suggesting he might be shorter. Paramount Studios developed an arsenal of techniques to make Ladd appear taller. The most famous was his frequent pairing with actress Veronica Lake, who was only 4 feet 11 inches, making Ladd appear relatively tall without needing camera tricks. Their partnership in 7 films was not just about chemistry, but strategic height management. For scenes with taller actors, more complex methods were needed. In Shane, director George Stevens dug trenches for co-stars like Jack Palance and Van Heflin to stand in when sharing scenes with Ladd. These Ladd trenches became standard practice. In other shots, Ladd stood on hidden platforms or apple boxes, nicknamed Ladd boxes. Cinematographers developed special low angles to make him more majestic. Costume designers created outfits with vertical stripes and high-waisted pants to create a visual lengthening effect. Custom shoes with internal lifts added 2 to 3 inches of height. What makes Ladd's case interesting is that height challenges perhaps contributed to his signature acting style. His minimalist approach, tight-lipped delivery with minimal movement and emotions conveyed mainly through eyes, likely developed partly because large gestures would disrupt the carefully arranged height illusions. As director Gene Negolesco observed, what Alan lacked in inches, he made up in intensity. The camera doesn't see height, it sees his eyes. From my perspective, Ladd is a classic example of Hollywood illusion. I feel a bit moved, a small person becoming a hero, with mystery about those dug trenches. Truly shockingly clever. Number 10. Edward G. Robinson, the giant Little Caesar. Edward G. Robinson created some of cinema's most fearsome characters, from the ruthless gangster Rico in Little Caesar to the relentless investigator in Double Indemnity. On screen, he projected a dominant presence that invariably shocked audiences when they learned his actual height was only 5 feet 5 inches. Robinson's height deception involved not just technical camera tricks, but a complete reimagination of how to convey physical intimidation. Instead of simply making Robinson appear taller, directors like Mervyn LeRoy and Fritz Lang focused on creating psychological dominance through performance and framing. The most effective technique was psychological positioning, placing Robinson in scenes where his character held power regardless of physical stature. When playing gangsters, he was often seated behind a desk while others stood before him, creating power dynamics that transcended height. In confrontation scenes, he invaded the personal space of taller actors, a technique that created discomfort and tension that registered on screen as intimidation. Robinson compensated for height with his extraordinary vocal projection and precise diction. His signature speaking style, clipped, forceful, with a nasal twang, created auditory dominance that complemented the visual presentation. As director John Huston observed, Eddie didn't need to be tall. He had a voice that made him 10 feet tall. Warner Brothers' publicity department worked overtime to minimize perceptions of Robinson's height, carefully controlling which reporters met him in person and scheduling interviews at seated events when possible. Official studio biographies listed him at 5 feet 9 inches, 4 inches taller than reality. What makes Robinson's case particularly noteworthy is that his height limitation actually enhanced his gangster portrayals. As critic Roger Ebert later noted, Robinson's smaller stature made his gangster roles more psychologically complex. This was a man who had to fight harder to survive in a world of bigger men. Personal analysis. Robinson is vocal power. I'm moved by how he turned small into scary, with a bit of mystery about psychological dominance. Sensational. Real gangsters don't need height. Number 11. Burgess Meredith. Small stature power. Burgess Meredith, with his remarkable versatility and characteristic intensity, made him one of Hollywood's most respected character actors. From his iconic role as Mickey in the Rocky series to his portrayal of the Penguin in the Batman TV series, many audiences didn't realize the actor who created larger-than-life characters was only 5 feet 5 inches tall, a height that required careful management on screen, especially in authoritative roles. Unlike leads needing to appear traditionally tall and majestic, Meredith's character actor career allowed more flexibility in how height was presented. For roles where small stature served the character's purpose, like the scrappy boxing trainer Mickey in Rocky, directors actually emphasized rather than hid the size to reinforce underdog qualities. For other roles needing more physical presence, traditional height-enhancing techniques were used. When playing military officers or authority figures, Meredith wore padded shoes and was placed on raised platforms when sharing scenes with taller actors. Cinematographers used low angles to create a more majestic visual presence. What's interesting about Meredith is his extraordinary vocal power that compensated for modest physical stature. His distinctive, resonant, precise voice projected considerably, creating auditory dominance that made physical size irrelevant. As director John Huston observed, Burgess didn't need height. He had a voice that filled the room and commanded attention regardless of physical size. Meredith's approach to movement also helped manage height perceptions. He developed a physicality characterized by economical, precise gestures and perfect posture that created maximum impact with minimal motion, a technique that enhanced performances and maintained carefully arranged height illusions. Unlike some short actors who seemed to compensate for height through aggressive performance styles, Meredith's work was characterized by subtlety and considerable control. This restraint created a different kind of authority that transcended physical size, the authority of perfect technique and absolute precision. Meredith rarely discussed height, focusing instead on the craft of acting and the importance of versatility. When occasionally asked about physical limitations for certain roles, he often responded with variations of, "An actor's job is to convince the audience of whatever the role requires. If I make you believe I'm a military commander or a boxing champion, then actual size doesn't matter." This professional focus on performance rather than physical attributes helped Meredith build one of Hollywood's most respected and enduring careers. As critic Pauline Kael observed, Burgess Meredith may be small in stature, but he can't give a small performance. Even in his quietest moments, he dominates the screen through sheer technique and intelligence. From perspective, Meredith is the real underdog. Emotions from Rocky, mystery about a giant voice in a small body. Number 12. Frank Sinatra, voice surpassing height. Frank Sinatra, with his legendary status as the voice and magnetic screen presence, made him one of the 20th century's most iconic entertainers. Many fans didn't realize the man who projected such dominant charisma was only 5 feet 7 inches tall and perhaps a bit less, a height that required careful management throughout his film career. What's interesting about Sinatra is that his initial fame as a singer created a public imagination image before most fans saw him in person. His voice's dominant power was such that many listeners naturally assumed he must be physically majestic, creating a perception that eased his transition to film roles regardless of modest stature. However, when Sinatra began his serious acting career, Especially after his Oscar-winning role in From Here to Eternity, studios used a variety of techniques to enhance his physical presence on screen. He consistently wore custom padded shoes that added about 2 to 3 inches of height in film appearances. Cinematographers used low angles to create a more majestic silhouette. Directors carefully managed scenes with Sinatra and taller female and male actors. When paired with taller leading ladies like the 5 feet 7 inches Doris Day or Deborah Kerr, arrangements kept Sinatra on higher terrain or had the actresses seated or in lower positions in key scenes. For male co-stars who significantly exceeded Sinatra's height, similar techniques were used to minimize obvious comparisons. Sinatra's legendary status and strong personality actually helped reinforce his screen presence regardless of physical size. His famous connections to powerful figures, including alleged organized crime links, created an aura of danger and authority that transcended mere height. As director Gordon Douglas observed, Frank carried himself like the most important person in the room, and because he believed it, everyone else did too. What distinguishes Sinatra from many short actors is his apparent comfort with height off-screen. While consistently wearing lifts in public appearances, he didn't seem particularly sensitive to height comparisons or jokes, a confidence that reinforced his authoritative image more effectively than any artificial height enhancement. This confidence extended to relationships with significantly taller women, including his marriage to Mia Farrow, who at 5 feet 9 inches visibly towered over him in joint public appearances. Instead of seeming diminished by the contrast, Sinatra's willingness to be seen with taller women reinforced his confident image. Sinatra's height management techniques became slightly more noticeable in later 1960s film appearances, especially as filming styles became more natural and technical artifice more apparent. However, by then his legendary status was so secure that audiences readily accepted his screen presence regardless of physical realities. As director Sidney J. Furie, who worked with Sinatra in The Naked Runner, later recalled, Frank had something more important than physical height. He had presence. When he walked onto a set, everyone felt it. The camera captured that kind of authentic power that made actual inches irrelevant. These 12 notable artists reveal the extraordinary lengths Hollywood went to maintain one of its most carefully guarded illusions, the perception of male leads as physically majestic figures regardless of actual stature. From Alan Ladd's famous trenches to James Cagney's special camera techniques, from Humphrey Bogart's hidden platforms to Frank Sinatra's custom padded shoes, these height deceptions required coordinated efforts from nearly every department involved in filmmaking. What stands out most from these stories is how height perception was deemed essential for male stars in a way not applied to female performers. While Hollywood imposed countless physical requirements on female actors, from weight to facial features to bust measurements, women were actually expected to be shorter than male co-stars, creating a double standard that reinforced traditional gender dynamics on screen. Perhaps the most revealing is how many of these short actors developed signature performance styles that helped compensate for modest stature. Cagney's explosive energy, Bogart's minimalist intensity, Robinson's psychological intimidation, these were not just artistic choices, but practical solutions to physical limitations that ultimately became defining elements of their screen personas. The legacy of these height deceptions provides a fascinating glimpse into Hollywood's complex relationship with physical reality and audience perception. In an industry built on illusions, star height management represents perhaps the most comprehensive and enduring deception, one that required coordinated efforts from directors, cinematographers, set designers, costume departments, and the stars themselves. Particularly striking is the success of these techniques in hiding the truth from audiences for decades. In the pre-internet fact-checking and tabloid exposure era, Movie fans largely accepted their screen idols' appearances without question. Carefully crafted lighting, strategic angles, and meticulous height management created convincing illusions that allowed audiences to focus on performances rather than physical realities. Perhaps the most valuable insight from these stories is recognizing how arbitrary many of Hollywood's physical standards have been throughout history. These 12 actors, all overcoming height limitations to create legendary careers, prove that authentic talent and screen presence ultimately matter far more than physical measurements. As James Cagney once observed, "It's not how tall you stand, but how tall you stand in people's hearts." For these small giants of the silver screen, their cultural stature far exceeds any temporary illusions created by apple boxes and camera angles, proving that true star power transcends physical measurements. And that's it. 12 legendary Hollywood stars who dominated the screen with larger-than-life personas while standing on hidden boxes, platforms, and trenches. From Humphrey Bogart's subtle intensity to James Cagney's explosive energy, from Alan Ladd's piercing gaze to Frank Sinatra's magnetic charisma, these actors created unforgettable performances that transcended their modest physical sizes. What makes these stories compelling is not just the technical tricks involved, but how these performers developed unique acting styles that turned potential limitations into signature strengths. The experience reminds us that true star quality has never been about physical measurements, but about that indefinable presence that keeps audiences from looking away. Which star shocked you the most? Have you ever noticed hints of these height deceptions in your favorite classic films? Let us know in the comments below. We love hearing which revelations most changed how you see these legendary performances. If you enjoyed this deeper look into Hollywood's hidden history, don't forget to like and subscribe for more videos revealing secrets behind classic cinema. Thanks for watching and see you in the next video.